Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Neurodivergent. If you're new here, do not subscribe, do not hit that like button, and whatever you do, do not comment on this video.
No?
Just so you know, in case you don't know, on this channel I mainly talk about autism and ADHD, and today we're diving into episode 2 of the viewer submitted story segment. So this is a series where I sit by my fake fireplace and read emails submitted by subscribers who choose to share their experiences of what it's like to be on the spectrum. I came up with this idea to do this series way back when I first started my channel because I realized I could only represent a tiny fraction of what it's like to have autism or ADHD. And because everyone's experience with it is so different from person to person, I thought this would be a great way to shed some light on others' experiences that were not my own. So, I'm about to read this viewer submitted story, but before I get into it, I want to give a disclaimer that I'm probably going to end up moving these stories either to a separate channel or behind a paywall at some point in the future, solely because it's not really consistent with the type of content people come to my channel for. But I definitely do want to continue doing this segment, so I'll keep you guys updated on that, but in the meantime, I'll keep sharing them here on my main channel until I decide what I'm going to do with them. Now, this one was sent to me way back in November of last year, and it's currently March, so if you submit a story to me and you expect me to crank out a video in a day or two, be prepared to be disappointed. All right, let's get into it. It starts out, "Hi Jen, I am a 53-year-old British autist. I can talk about many things, but I want to talk about my lifetime experience of masking and how it led to the total collapse of my life. I can distinctly remember my first decision to mask, although that's not how I would have labeled it at the time. It was a moment where I realized that who I was not socially acceptable." It's funny how we're able to look back and recognize past behaviors as neurodivergent traits that we actually have terminology to describe now. I know for a lot of us later diagnosed adults, we remember how we felt different and we were constantly trying to hide that difference from others, but we didn't know what it was called or that anyone else on this planet experienced the same things. Now many of us are finding out we weren't as alone as we thought, so let's read on to see what masking looked like for him. "I started school at the age of 4 at a small private school where I was in a class of maybe 20 children. I had already learned to read before I started, and in this school I remember being accepted for who I was at the time, and I was allowed to read my own books while the rest of the children read what I thought were baby books. It was a lovely time in my life with some great early memories. Unfortunately, this was in the mid-70s and there was a major financial crisis and my family could not afford to continue sending me there. I had to move to a state primary school, public grade school in the US, I think, question mark. Yeah, we call it elementary school here, talking about like grades 1 through 5. This is when the trouble started. I clearly remember a few incidences. In the first week, we had class reading, when each child had to read a paragraph from a very basic book in turn. I'd read the whole thing through before it came to my turn, so I got told off for not paying attention. So sometimes when I read these stories, people share things about themselves that unlock similar memories for myself that I had completely forgotten about, and this was absolutely one of them. I also used to read ahead in stories in school because I felt like the class was going too slow for me. Then when I would get called upon to read my part or the teacher asked me a question, I would have no idea where everyone was and I would get in trouble for not paying attention. And really, everyone was just moving way too slowly for me and it was torturous. And honestly, this could fall to ADHD or autism because many children with autism are oftentimes hyperlexic or gifted readers, and obviously people with ADHD can get easily understimulated and bored. So I don't know which of my neurodivergent monsters was driving that behavior for me personally, but I absolutely did this exact same thing. That incident seemed to be the starting point of the conflict between me and that teacher. Everything I did was wrong. The other children thought I was stupid. I responded by play acting as a way to try to survive this living hell. I would walk around the class making stupid noises and hand and head movements, including, of course, the famous arm flapping movement. Famous arm flapping movement, trademark, TM. The other children called me a spastic, which was the 1970s British term for someone with cerebral palsy. My mother was called into the school to speak with the headmistress about my disruptive behavior. That evening, my mother was both sad and furious. She said that because she was a widowed single mother, the social services might come and take me away and put me in a children's home if I didn't stop acting up. I was so scared that I stopped. That was the start of my masking. I shut down and kept quiet at school. I endured primary and middle school in that state. I hated it so much. There was nowhere I could go to be myself around other people. During that time, I discovered the local library, and I spent most of my time in there. When I was 11, I got interested in computers, and there was a man, a friend of my mother, whose retired father had been a signals engineer during World War II. He had what would now be called a man cave. He let me sit in there while he worked on various hobby projects with radio, computers, and electronics. He let me just sit there, and he smoked his pipe and soldered. I loved being there, and eventually I saved enough money to get my own computer when I was 12, which led to my eventual career as a computer programmer. I didn't have to mask in his man cave, and I could ask as many questions as I liked, and he didn't show any lack of tolerance for me. So, lots to comment on here. First is that the term spastic has been used as a denigration, I think, here in the US, but I haven't heard that term in forever. But I also feel like we used to maybe use it to describe someone who is generally, I don't know, quirky or unpredictable. But if that term was used for someone who had cerebral palsy back in the day, it seems like the kids were probably making fun of this person's stimming, if I'm understanding the context correctly. So this is just another sad example of autistic bullying, assuming that's the case. And second, the story about your mom's reaction here makes me sad for you. I'm sure she just had her hands full and was doing her best. And back then, because parents and teachers didn't fully understand the behaviors of autism and neurodivergence, they just viewed it as bad behavior that needed to be corrected. And I want to comment on this line here where you talk about feeling like you could never go anywhere where you felt like you could be yourself, because I feel like that's probably super relatable for a lot of us. I mean, heck, a lot of the times I almost feel like I'm even an outsider in the neurodivergent community, depending on what group I'm in. But I am glad that you were able to find an adult that just let you hang out with him in his man cave. If there are any adults out there listening to this because you have or know a kid on the spectrum, I want to point out the positive impact you can have on them, that not only by letting them be themselves and encouraging their special interests, but also by treating them with a little bit more maturity in some regard. Because the truth of the matter is that many kids on the spectrum might have a higher level of maturity and understanding in a way that I do feel like is unique to autism, which is why a lot of us get called old souls. Hey guys, Editing Jen here. I wanted to jump in and clarify the point I tried to make there, because it might be confusing, as most would consider children with autism to be more immature compared to their peers. It is true that people with autism can have uneven development in certain areas. Children with autism can have special interests in things considered to be young for their age for periods lasting longer than their peers. However, I personally remember having a particularly mature level of understanding when spoken to like a young adult. I also remember people specifically calling me an old soul when I was younger. So that's what I was trying to say here. So it's easy for us to forget just how real and grown up their feelings are. I personally did have an adult in my younger life that did a great job of not treating me like a dumb kid, and it was something that always stuck with me and boosted my self-esteem. During secondary school, I was fortunate enough to have teachers who encouraged my interest in math, science, computers, and history. I was very lucky. I was seen as a nerd, of course, but I didn't experience the bullying I had at primary and middle school. The problems really came when I went to university. The first 2 years were fine. I was studying maths and physics, and everything was going well for me. I enjoyed being around other nerds and loved the wider educational opportunities of university life. Then I met the girl who would become my first girlfriend, and everything fell apart for me. For me, it was love at first sight. I quickly became infatuated. We became friends, and we shared a sense of humor. But I knew I could not share my real inner autistic core with her. I kept it covered up and only interacted with her through quirky humor, which she loved. I was very good at hiding everything I now know is autism. Unfortunately, the strain of not revealing my nerdy core to her led to what I now know is autistic burnout. I completely flunked my 3rd year of my degree, partly because of the burnout and partly because I was trying to reject my own self as a nerd. I wanted to be a quote-unquote normal person for her, which meant putting my interests in maths and physics into my past. I thought that personal growth for me was to become a people person and reject what I had been as something from my childhood and not relevant to my future with her as a normal adult. Without maths and physics, I had nothing. So I put myself forward to be ordained as an Anglican priest. I built a complete new persona around this idea because I thought it would be something socially acceptable. Of course, because of my burnout, I ended up breaking up with her, but I continued with the trainee Anglican priest persona, all through theological college, which I excelled at. Although the ordination never happened because fundamentally I wasn't suited to it. And it was obvious to the bishop, but not me, that I wasn't fundamentally suited to it. So I see another thing here that many of us late diagnosed adults can relate to, which is how many of us pushed ourselves so hard to conform to neurotypical standards before we found out we were on the spectrum. I feel like all of us at some point in our lives read the self-help books like How to Win Friends and Influence People or How to Organize Your Home in 10 Easy Steps, which just makes us feel like even more of a failure because we're putting in all the work, but despite following all the steps, it doesn't seem to work for us like it does for everyone else, which is obviously because we didn't know we were autistic at the time, so we don't realize that most of these resources contain strategies that don't work with neurodivergent brain wiring. So most of us can relate to wasting years of our lives trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, which leads to burnout. So we see he tried to act normal and win people over with his quirky behavior, and that he even tried to be an Anglican priest, which obviously takes a lot of peopling and people skills, which isn't intuitive for most of us. So even though I'm sure he cared about the people he wanted to help, the bishop probably picked up on the fact that it just didn't come naturally for him. I met and married a woman who was attracted to the mask, and of course, that would end in complete disaster, but not before we had 2 children. She had her own mask too, a narcissistic one, so it was mutually disastrous. I won't say too much about that in detail because I don't believe in washing dirty laundry in public, but basing my life on this persona led to everything completely falling apart around and inside me. It's interesting to hear him talk about this here because I have heard like a running theme that a lot of people on the spectrum have a higher likelihood of attracting certain personality types to them. And some of the most common ones I hear of are narcissists or codependents. I eventually found my way back to maths and computing, and I was able to build up a consultancy business in that area. I quickly learned that I am not capable of working in an office because of the effort of pretending to be a professional person. So I developed a way of working that would be called hybrid now, long before it became a trend. The problem with being an autist is that where most people have strong social instincts, I have a gaping void. I have no social motivation whatsoever. For NTs, their entire lives are lived in their social context, but for me, social interaction is an unwelcome interruption of my constant stream of thoughts and research about what I suppose are my special interests. But only a fellow autist can understand this. While I have no social motivation at all, I do have a need for normal human connection. That is, to be meaningful to someone and to find someone who is meaningful to me. I am very lucky to have found someone with whom I can coexist in a fairly permanent state of parallel play, which is all I want. I am now married to someone with whom I share a sense of humor and outlook on the world and with similar emotional temperature. She accepts my nerd core, although she doesn't understand it at all. Nobody can, of course. She loves me for my traits and not despite them. This is what I have learned. The vast majority of people seem to be fully motivated by social factors, although it seems to be much stronger in women than in men. Most of the women I know, except for my wife, seem to make decisions based on social factors that I can't even begin to guess at, let alone understand. I spent my teenage years completely baffled at the strange decisions my older female cousins made, and I found girls my age to be completely impossible to understand. I think that in men it seems to manifest in social behavior such as supporting football teams, etc., or in rivalry to be the top dog or alpha male. I don't fully accept the alpha beta male model, but the vast majority of men seem to be anxious to fit in, not rock the boat, keep their head down, pay the mortgage, etc., whilst the want-to-be alpha jockeys for the positions at the top. I'm not interested in being either. I just want to be free to do my own thing and follow my own interests. Couple of points I want to make here. And just so you all know, I read these stories exactly as they are submitted to me. So I understand that language might make some people uncomfortable, but I want to focus on the broader concept of what I think he's trying to say here, which pertains to the social motivations within the autism community, because some studies have shown that people on the spectrum aren't as motivated by peer approval as their non-autistic cohorts. One of these studies actually found that this trait has some positive moral implications, but this can seem confusing for many of us because we also constantly talk about how we mask, which is mainly what this email is addressing. So masking makes it seem like we do care about our social status, but the two are not the same. Masking is a fear of being ostracized, which if we go back has some biological roots pertaining to survival and whatnot. And in some ways, we could almost think of that like a negative motivation. And the other could be thought of as more of a positive motivation of obtaining social status or climbing the social hierarchy or whatever you want to call it, which is completely different. I am thinking of doing a video going more in depth on these distinctions, so I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but I do think that's kind of what he's trying to say there. The second thing I want to touch on is how he talks about the confusing behavior of females, because research does show that females are usually more socially motivated regardless of neurotype. This is one of the speculated reasons of why girls get missed for diagnoses, because our social motivation leads us to perfecting our masking game, and that can make it harder to detect autism in females. So while this might be a little bit more muted, I guess you could say, for autistic females compared to non-autistic females, it still might be slightly more elevated for us than for autistic males. And regardless of what you believe the cause of gender differences to be, I think we can all acknowledge they exist. And because of that, one could theorize that the widest chasm between social motivations might exist between autistic males to non-autistic females, which is what I think he's kind of trying to describe there. And yes, I'm generalizing, but I am just trying to provide a broad overview of possibilities and maybe like higher likelihoods in this area, if that makes sense. The outcome is that since I have learned about the concept of masking, I have come to believe that it's still an essential tool in a world where autists have to deal with allists, i.e. allistic, non-autistic, neurotypical people. Either you mask or you deal with the fallout from allists getting yanked out of their comfort zone, and to be honest, the ensuing drama can be more exhausting than the masking. But with that said, I will never ever again attempt to build my entire life around a constructed persona based on what I think might be more socially acceptable. I'll stop now. This is turning rambly. So that's it. I want to say a huge thank you to the individual who sent this in. I think it brings up a lot of fascinating points about their experiences with masking that a lot of us might relate to. And the biggest takeaway for me is that freedom that many of us experience post-diagnosis that allows us to stop trying to be something that we're not and to give ourselves a little bit more grace and understanding. With that said, let me know what you think about this format in the comments section below. Did I insert too much commentary or not enough commentary? Or maybe some of you would just prefer I read the emails by themselves? I don't know. Whatever your feedback is, let me know. And hopefully I'll catch you in my next video. Bye for now. Mwah. If you'd like to submit a story to be read on my channel, please visit neurodivergent.com. Make sure you submit your story through the proper channel, as stories submitted via regular email will not get included in this segment. You'll find a list of suggestions for the type of content I'm looking for, and don't forget to let me know if you're okay with me using your first name. And finally, if you'd like to read these stories without my commentary, you can find those on the viewer submitted stories page as well.